Hello. Oh, lovely to see your faces. Uh, and good to be here. And we're going to carry on a series of Nehemiah. Well, as you can see that from the screen. But as many of you know, I don't live in Lowestoft. I live in Norwich, and I'm born and bred Norwich. Have lived there for the best part of 52 years. Travelled for a bit, for a few years. But really, most of my life has been spent in Norwich. And as I get older, I'm increasingly aware of my utter ignorance about Norwich. I was once this is true, I was watching a documentary once about this amazing cathedral, and I was thinking, wow, that looks incredible, I should go there sometime. I'm not kidding. It was Norwich. And I learned a little bit about the walls of Norwich as well recently. And maybe you know all this. How many people know how many towers, Flint Towers, used to be around the city of Norwich? I know you're from Lowestoft, I know it's Suffolk, I know this is Norwich, and just bear with me, all right? And does anyone know that? Does anyone care? Well, do you know what? You're going to learn. Neve cares. Thank you, you're my friend. Thank you. There were 40. That's quite a few. Flint Towers. How many gates? Anyone know that? Around Norwich? This is around the 14th century when they completed the wall. No, you don't care either, but I'm going to tell you. And no doubt you'll remember, and tell someone probably this week. Maybe not. There were 14 gates around the city of Norwich. And did you know this, that it was the longest sort of continuous defence of a city through walls and gates and towers, bigger than London? It was biggest in the UK, apparently. So that's pretty impressive, I think. I've learned that about Norwich. And the thing about gates and walls and things, and we're going to be looking at that a little bit today, is that they not only give protection, the walls around a city and the towers and so on, they not only give protection from enemies coming in, but they also give identity to the people who are part of that city. There's something saying within these walls, I'm from Norwich, I'm part of the city of Norwich from within those walls. There's something defining about them, about their identity. And it's the same a little bit like with the Jerusalem, this city where God had led his people, the story of the Old Testament leading up to this, where you're going to have a place, a city where my name will dwell, God says. There's going to be a temple gets built by Solomon. David has his tabernacle. There's a temple by Solomon, massive temple on the mount. It was seen from miles around. It was the central place of the worship. They had this city with walls around it. And it gave them at that time this kind of sense of their identity, who they were. The Temple Mount, the dwelling place of God. Now, these things were central to them, but they were only shadows. And they were never the end game. It was always pointing to something greater. The Bible goes on to talk about through its story, if you're new to the Bible, of the new heavens, new earth, where God would be with his people. That's the main deal, really. You shoot through from Genesis through to Revelation, it's God with his people. And that getting messed up and broken up, and then God restoring that back in, ultimately then in Jesus, the new temple, that in him you meet God. And then the new heavens, new earth, right? There's a lot to fill in there, of course, but that's kind of like the deal. And so at this period in the Israelites, the Jews, sort of the people of God, the time they were in, they'd been taken off into exile because they turned away from God. They're like, hey, we're going to do it our own way. And you can read about this at the end of 2 Kings, where this much more powerful king, Nebuchadnezzar, the ruler of Babylon, comes in and basically blitzes the city of Jerusalem, burns down the walls and the temple's destroyed and takes everyone away into exile. And not in a good place. And he leaves, it says in the end of 2 Kings, chapter 24 and 25, talks about leaves those that were poor. In other words, those are left in the city who have no resources, no ability to set right what has gone wrong. And that's the situation that the people of God find themselves in. Now, they could have settled, the people, those that are in exile, could have been like, you know what, Babylon's not quite so bad, is it? I mean, you've got the gardens. seventh wonder of the world, Hanging Gardens of Babylon. You know, you've got the guy, impressive place. If you read descriptions of Babylon, I mean, seriously impressive. You think coming into Norwich is impressive. It was with the gates. I won't go back on the gates, but they were quite impressive, these walls. Anyway, but the point is that those that were taken into exile, well, you know, Babylon. They could have maybe settled in that. They did settle there for a while. And also, though, those in Jerusalem could have settled maybe in a different way with, well, do you know what? We'll just live with broken walls. We'll just live with the temple in rubble. We'll just live with the gates broken and bust up. We'll just live with it. Oh, well, let's make the best of this bad situation. But that's not the story of the Bible. That's not the story of Nehemiah. The story of Nehemiah is of one man, Nehemiah, well, and Ezra as well. Those two books, Ezra and Nehemiah, they're both together in the Bible, go together, really. And but this one man, Nehemiah, who heard about the walls that were broken down, when he hears that news, he doesn't say, well, do you know what? I've got a great job. I mean, I work in the palace. I'm the cupbearer. I've got a decent job. It's a good salary. I get food, good retirement plan. I've got no idea what that was really. But you know what I'm saying? He could have easily settled and gone, well, I feel sad for what's kind of going on in Jerusalem. But I'm too busy, you know, I've got stuff going on. I haven't got time really to get involved in that. Because when we get involved in the brokenness of situations, that requires sacrifice, doesn't it? It always does. And yet Nehemiah heard what had gone on. And what was his response? Remember, he wept. Open your Bibles, by the way, if you want. Nehemiah chapter 2, chapter 3. Do open them up, have a look. What did he do? He wept, he fasted, he mourned, he was grieved, he prayed, and then he took some action and thought, you know what? I'm going to stand up and be counted and do something about this. I'm not just going to stay where I can't allow this grief and I'm feeling to just stay where I am. And Mike opened up chapter 2 to us last week. And so he goes off and he goes into the ruins and the mess, and he resists the opposition of the enemy in order to restore. And if by this point there are little markers going, oh, that sounds like another story, doesn't it? That sounds like someone else that we know. Well, yes, it's just like Christ. All these things, shadows pointing towards Jesus is our Nehemiah, as it were, the one who hears our cries, who comes to us, who gives everything for us, who enters the ruins and the mess and the muck in order to restore. That's what Jesus does. That's why the gospel is good news. Whether you're hearing that for the 100th, millionth time, or whether it's the first time you've ever heard that there's a God that loves you that much, that he'd enter your mess, stand in your place, so that you could be forgiven and restored. That's good news that we all need. The people in Jerusalem couldn't sort it out. They needed someone to come from the outside. You see the picture? And I'm not going to read all of chapter 3. We're going to get there in a minute, but I'll just pull out a few bits because I want to leave time at the end to really pray for deacons in a minute. And this kind of really fits with that. But the response of people was not to kind of, when Nehemiah came, was not to, again, sit on their hands. Suddenly, people get rallied to this call and what Nehemiah wants to do. And in chapter 2, verse 18, and again, Mike unpacked that chapter, but just at the end there's that phrase, let us get up and build. Let us arise and build. Now, sometimes certain words, for me anyway, like arise, I don't use that word in my normal everyday. I shall arise today and go forth into the world. I just don't speak like that. So what does it mean, arise? I don't know. Get out of bed. Get off the sofa. Turn off the telly. Pay attention to what's going on and be intentional about giving my time. Arise. Do something. You know, whatever that might mean for each one of us, where we're at in our circumstances, and I totally get that's different for each one. It will look different for each one of us. But sometimes these words can be so sort of wrapped up, arise. And it's like, well, what does that mean? It's got to mean something. And it meant for them, they started to give themselves, getting their hands dirty in the building of the wall. That's what they did. They got down in the rubble. They got down in the mess, in the bricks. Remember, this had been burnt. There was, probably, charred beams and all sorts of stuff all over the place, but they got right into it. Why? Because Nehemiah had led the way. Why do we get right into it in church? Why? Because Jesus has led the way. Isn't that right? Yeah. And so we give ourselves. They put their hands to the good work, it says. And we give our hands, as it were, to the good work of doing what Jesus is doing. And what work is Jesus doing? Building his church. So then we get involved in that. And as Lowestoft Community Church, if we can just put up your sort of, this is an attempt, the vision thing, the three things up there, if that can go up next. I'm sure it'll come on there. It's just an attempt to crystallize into some language what the Bible says about what we're to give ourselves to as local churches, but also with that sense of God speaking to a local church as well, with some specifics of emphasis and things like that. And you see that in Revelation when God speaks to the different churches and so on. And it says this on the screen where you can read it. LCC is a church family united in mission to make disciples of Jesus who love God and one another. That's the main deal. Love their local community in words and actions, and engage in starting, strengthening, and serving other churches. Each one of us, if you would consider yourself part of LCC, then you have a part to play in this. Do you know that? Maybe you're a bit, I don't know, do I? What, little on me, what I do? Oh, feels a bit insignificant. Or maybe like, oh yeah, I'm all in. I don't know. I guess there'd be a whole spectrum of responses to that across a congregation like this. But there's a few things I think just to draw out before we sort of pray for deacons and so on. One is just a few things here that I see really learn from this. One is that they were first a graced people. What do I mean by that? They knew the favour and grace of God first. Nehemiah himself, it says that back in chapter 1 and 2, or somewhere around there anyway, that he received favour from the king that he was working for. He received, it says, favour from God as well. He knew the favour of God. It's like the grace of God. And then there's this name as well in chapter 3, verse 11. Like I said, I'm not going to read chapter 3 out, okay? It's loads of names, loads of buildings, loads of gates, loads of doors. But you know what? There is a story behind every one. That's true. Okay, you don't just read it and go, oh, there's a load of names and lists here. There is genuinely a story behind these different things. And each of these names even, there's one name, and if you look at chapter 3, verse 11, there's this guy called Malchiah, the son of Harim. Who's he? I wonder what he was like. I wonder whether he was an introvert, an extrovert. I wonder what his favourite food was, what his family life was like. Now, these are people. And this guy, well, actually, when Ezra and Nehemiah turned up back in Jerusalem, he wasn't actually doing so well. But he was compromising his life. And you can read that back in Ezra. At the end of Ezra, it talks about these people, these guys who had married wives from other nations, and they weren't meant to do that. And this guy's name is in the list. But here he is building the wall. So what happened between that and that? Grace. The guy responded to that, oh my goodness, I shouldn't be living this way. He sought to put those things right, but he was a graced man. You see, you haven't got to think that it's why it's so important that we understand the grace of God, because if our serving and our giving ourselves to church life flows out from anywhere else, it's just not fun, to be honest. And it's wearing, like we've been praying this morning about God's strength in weakness. The Bible actually says it's good to be strengthened by grace. By grace. It's so important, that phrase that you maybe heard a million times, that we serve from acceptance, not for acceptance. We serve from acceptance. And being a graced people. Really important that we grasp that. Second thing is that they're a diverse people. Now, I'm not going to go into this, but because it's stating the obvious, but there's like 38 names in this list. There's about 42 different groups, possibly all ages. Talks about how one of the guys got his daughters involved. We don't know what age they were. They may have been adults. But the point is, I think there's just all ages. Everyone was involved in this, men and women, all walks of life, all together. Different people, graced people. They're diverse people. They've got different focus, but the same goal. Again, you read through that list of all the different parts of the wall and the gates and what they're doing and everything. And so there is a different focus for them all. But there's this one goal: build the wall. If you'd have stopped any single one of them and asked them what you're doing, well, we're building the wall of Jerusalem. That's what we're doing. But you're just putting a brick in place. No, I'm building the wall. Yeah, but you're just putting a nail in a door. No, I'm building it. That's what we're doing together. And this, it's gone. If we can put the thing back up again, just leave it up there, it's fine. That is the vision. It's what we're doing. So when someone says, why are you stacking chairs? Oh, I'm doing that. The vision. Can we put that back up again? The three things. Brilliant, thank you. You know, that's what we're doing. Oh yeah, but I'm just making some tea for some people. No, that's what you're doing. Do we get it? This is what we're part of. Diverse people, different focus, same goal, different parts, but very much together. Again, 21 times through chapter 3, you get this little phrase, and next to them, and next to them, and next to them, and next to them, and next to them. I'm not going to do 21, but you get the point. Next to them, together, unity, shoulder to shoulder, building the same deal. That's what it's about, which isn't always easy. And sometimes when you're shoulder to shoulder, you know, things happen. It's like, you know, we rub each other up sometimes. That's going to happen. But we commit ourselves to that, working together, shoulder to shoulder, side by side, unity, building this thing. And then everyone has a part to play as well. So graced people, diverse people, different focus but the same goal, different parts but very much together, and just everyone with a part to play. In, again, 1 Corinthians, again, a passage that no doubt will be familiar to many. 1 Corinthians chapter 12. In verse 14, talks about the church, but Paul's talking about the church, and he says, for the body is not one member, but it's many. We know that. But then there's verse 15. When I read it, and this is a different translation I've been reading the past few years, it's slightly different, and the way it phrases it just says, if the foot says, because I'm not a hand, or I'm not part of the body. And it just made me think, how often do we think, well, because I ain't like them, I can't quite do what they do. I'd love to have their gift and do what they could do. Maybe I'm just not really part of the body. Maybe I'm no use, really. Does anybody ever do comparisons and possibly think those things some of the time? I don't think I'm the only one. Just because we look at someone else, God, they're made, oh, I'm not like that. I can't do that. No, because you've been made differently and unique for another reason. That's important. That we need one another, and the foot can't say to the hand, I don't need you. I mean, it is ridiculous. It's kind of a laughable picture, isn't it, of a body going, the foot having a conversation with a hand going, I wish I was a hand, you know. Or saying, you know, you need each other, you know. The hand can't reach up there without the foot. It's going to have a bit of a problem doing that. And so you can read through chapter 12, maybe in your life groups or something, go through that in 1 Corinthians and talk about how you're the body and how you need one another. There's a story that I may well have told here before, which was, if I have, forgive me, but I think it makes the point. And there's a story I saw on the news. I followed BBC Africa just to look at news in different places of the world. And it was a story of a mother that was born with no arms. And then they interviewed her son. And they interviewed them both about the relationship that they have. And she says things like, well, my son is my arms. You know, this woman is obviously limited in what she can do. You know, sometimes it's more obvious. The fact is, we're all limited in different ways. And there was something really quite beautiful and special about the way, because let me just give a few things that came out of it for me. when I saw that story. The first thing reading that story was our gaps, our lack exposes our need of one another. We have to ask the question, do I really think I need you? And I mean really need you. Not in a kind of, yeah, I kind of need you, if you're available. No, we really need one another. This woman really needed her son to do what she couldn't do. So it exposes our need for others. The second thing our gaps do is it draws out the gifting and allows space for others. This boy was capable of an awful lot, quite a young age. See, if we keep filling all the gaps, thinking we've got to fill all the gaps individually, doesn't leave any room for growth, does it? Others grow in those gaps. It's okay to have gaps in things, in ourselves, even as a church. It's okay. We trust that God will bring the right people along. But it draws out the gifting in others. And the third thing I think our gaps do is deepen our relationship with others as well. There's something about that when you're dependent on someone or people. There are so many people I'm dependent on. Here, at Kings in Norwich, more broadly, in my family. Boy, I've got so many gaps. The older you get, I think the more I realise, they're bigger than I thought. But then it puts a smile on my face, genuinely, because I think, oh Lord, that's not bad. That's a good thing. It's a good thing. Because you can teach me more about what it's like to be a follower of you in that. So we can feel limited, whether it's health, age, capacity. We've all got a part to play. So this is what we see in these people who give their lives to serve. There's a little bit of a contrast in verse 5, where you've got these, it says the nobles, they're pretty high up, I guess, would not put their shoulders, or would not literally bring their necks. That's kind of what the word means. They wouldn't bring their necks to the work under their supervisors. They were sort of fearful, maybe of being vulnerable to attack on that part of wall, but more likely they were just prideful. They didn't want to get involved in that dirty, messy work. Well, that is not the model that Jesus gives, is it, when he washes the disciples' feet and ultimately goes to the cross. He says, no, this is what serving looks like. This is what servanthood looks like. And that's got to flavour everything that we do. And it did. It flavoured the early disciples. That's why you read the list in Romans chapter 16 when Paul writes to that church there. And the first thing he writes in it is, I commend to you our sister Phoebe, a servant of the church in Kenkare. The first thing he says, I commend to you someone who's a servant. I commend to you. And that's what we're going to be doing in a minute with these guys we're laying hands on, who are deacons. And I'll explain a bit about that, just to give a little bit of context. First of all Christians, like I've just said, are servants. The Bible uses words, same word in different ways, just like our English language. Same words are used in different ways sometimes, depending on context and so on. The word servant is sometimes used to highlight someone who has a particular, I think, serving role within a local church, like I think Phoebe in Romans 16, verse 1. That she was a servant, a deacon in the church in Kenkare. There's something about, there was something recognized in that. And in 1 Timothy as well, chapter 3, you can read there, you've got Paul talks about the leadership of local churches. So he talks about elders, but then he goes on to talk about deacons as well. And again, you can read that. So again, this word that is used there, okay, it seems to be there are some in a particular leadership role and capacity in the local church that are recognized and could be called deacons. And we also know that from Philippians, another letter that Paul writes, Philippians chapter 1, when Paul writes to the church there, and he says, to the saints, in other words, to you all, and to the elders and the deacons among you. So it's to all of us, but within that, there are some who are called to serve the church in a particular way, who are elders and deacons. And so that's why we're going to be laying hands on these guys, recognizing them in the way that they serve the church. Now, I totally get it that the word deacon may mean nothing to you. If you're here for the first time, you're not a Christian, and you're just like, I have no idea what you're talking about. That's okay, all right? In any group, you're going to have different sort of words to explain things, how things work. But maybe you've come from a church background where the word deacon meant something particular. So I totally understand that. And so let me briefly explain, and you may have heard this before, but it's good to reinforce it again if you haven't, how we're using the word deacon here to describe someone. Why is someone a deacon and someone not if all are servants? That's an utterly fair question to ask. Well, the first thing we see of deacons, I think, in the New Testament is that there's a releasing that is going on. There is a releasing of elders to do what elders are called to do, to shepherd the flock of God, give themselves to word and to prayer. There's something about that deacons do to free up elders to do what elders need to do in the local church. So they're not getting drawn into things that they're not meant to be involved in. So one is releasing. The second thing is they're responsible. The way we're looking at it is that someone who's a deacon will be responsible directly to the elders. So they're working, as it were, on part of they're shoulder to shoulder with the elders of the church. And that's one sense what the core team we've talked about here, where you've got kind of like elders and deacons who are meeting together. It's not only elders and deacons in that team, and there may be others and some fluidity with it and so on, but in one sense that's what it is, elders and deacons who are serving the church together, men and women together. Then you've got the third R, so releasing, responsible, and then role. That these people need to have a recognized role within the church, a defined role that they are doing, carrying clear responsibility in what they are doing, and then recognized. Not recognized because they want to be seen, right? That's not what this is about. Deacon isn't a title, by the way. Not what this is about. It's not about titles. It's about helpful definitions for some people in the church in the way that they serve, so people know who they are, and there's a gift of God on them, and a calling on them to serve in that particular role. And so for a deacon to be recognized, what we're saying, it's helpful for the church, all of us, to know who they are. So that when you want to ask a question about life groups, or a question about youth, or a question about worship, or a question about whatever, you go, I don't need to go to talk to the elders, as lovely as they are. You can go and find the person who's responsible for it, because you'll probably get a clearer answer. Yeah? That's helpful in the local church, that you know who's carrying responsibility for these areas. And so what we're saying is a deacon needs to kind of tick all four of these R's. Releasing elders, responsible directly to elders, a clearly defined role in the church, functioning in a leadership role, and recognize it's important and helpful for the church to know who these people are. And it's also important they should be recognized as suitable by the church as well. 1 Timothy 3 talks about these characteristics there as well. There's that track record of good character, faithfulness, people with a good reputation in the church, and full of the Holy Spirit and wisdom. And so the people we're praying for together, that's why we're praying for them. To anoint them, to commission them, if you like, into what they're doing. The Bible speaks about laying on of hands and so on. So Mike and Martin will come and lead that in a bit. They're the elders here, and they'll come and lead that through. But first we're gonna stand, and we're gonna, if you're able to, and Sam, coming all the way from the back, is going to come and lead us. Should we stand if you're able to? I'd like to. We don't have to. You can stay. I don't really, whatever. I'm going to pray, and we're going to worship for a bit. But let's go back to that deal of they're first a graced people, and they're giving themselves to the work. That it's good to be strengthened by grace, and grace is a joy-bringing deal, isn't it? When you get graced by someone, when someone does something for you that's unexpected, that you haven't earned, you don't deserve, and they just do something for you, yeah. When you put a smile, you'll be like, oh wow, oh, thank you. I didn't even ask, but wow, I've done nothing for that. Being graced is lovely, beautiful, and it's good to be strengthened by grace. And the joy of the Lord is our strength. Joy. So Lord, I pray for that, Father. Amidst rubble sometimes, amidst in the middle of mess and bricks, which we're working out things and how it all fits together and all the rest of it. Lord, the joy of the Lord is your strength. I'm pretty sure that's in Nehemiah, isn't it? The joy of the Lord is your strength, even amidst this. Even when our sin gets exposed sometimes, it's like, what? But there's grace. And where sin abounds, grace abounds even more. There's even more of it. Lord, thank you, you're not repelled by our brokenness and sin, but you're more drawn to it. I want to heal it. I want to sort that. Let me in to do that. So I pray for that, Lord. Open hearts, open minds. to be graced by you, that then everything continues to flow out from that in this church here. But we know grace is at the foundation. We know that. But we want to keep revisiting that and going, oh, Lord, I want to keep leading out from that place, keep serving out from that place, whatever we're doing. And recognizing that each one of us part is so important in all that we're doing together. Amen.